Previously on Featherstone Bicycles.
Well, it's time to take the parts out of the evapor rust and the solvent. They've been in there for quite a few days. They should be rust-free or have very little rust on them. Just a little bit of cleanup is necessary. And then, since we had so much fun on the front wheel, we'll get into the back wheel. That's what's happening on this episode of Featherstone Bicycles. So we'll start with taking some of the pieces out. This is the gooseneck bolt. Most of the rust on the top of that bolt is gone. The shifter bracket, which was very rusty, is almost entirely rust-free. This is the bracket that held down the cable for the front brake. Again, a lot of pitting here where the severe rust was. There's no getting around that, but the majority of the rust is gone. The seat post bracket, which was extremely rusty, is almost entirely rust-free now at this point. Again, a lot of pitting here where the rust was very severe, but there's not much we can do about that. The chain looks very good. We're going to have to do some additional cleaning on this and then condition it with some one-step cleaner and lubricant from Finish Line. I don't think we don't have anything else currently in the evapor rust. So we'll just take a little steel wool to these parts. We'll hit this up on the wire wheel brush as well. Yeah, the pitting was very bad at the bottom of this bracket. You can tell when you rub the steel wool over it that it's very rough as opposed to the smooth, shiny chrome. Okay, that's good for those pieces. Next, we have the pieces that have been sitting in the solvent, which are primarily the pieces from the kickstand. This is the piece that's a triangle on one side, circle on the other, and it has the slots that holds the kickstand up or down. There's the spring for the kickstand. Here's the washer that has the spacer, the groove in the center that the external pin goes through to hold the whole kickstand in place on the bracket. There's the washer that's on the other end of the spring. This is the wedge nut that goes at the bottom of the gooseneck. Keeps it tight. Here's the pin, the internal pin that holds the spring in place on the kickstand. And then we've got one last little pin. That is the pin that goes on the outside through the bracket into this groove and then holds the whole kickstand in place inside the bracket. All the grease came off very nicely sitting in the solvent for a few days. We'll just need to touch that up a little bit and then hit everything with the wire wheel as well. So what I'm going to do now with the chain is take the small wire brush and wipe down, brush out any of the dirt and grime, sometimes grease. Unfortunately, people put grease on a bike chain instead of oil, and this one is not bad. This one does not look like it's had grease on it, but I have gotten chains in unbelievably bad condition. But just get some of that off. And turn the whole thing around. Most people who restore bikes, well, I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of videos that I see online of restorations, people will just buy a new chain, and unless the chain is mangled, damaged beyond repair, or has stretched out to the point that it's really not going to perform well on the bike, I prefer to reuse the old chain. Just buy a master link to put it back together. And it should be fine. I think what we'll do, since we've had it in the evapor rust for a few days, is now we'll let it sit in the solvent for a few days. And get some of that other additional grease and dirt off, oil, whatnot. In between the linkages. I'm gonna have to pour some more Fast 505 from Zepp.
get it up over the top. We'll let that sit for a few days. Now we're going to get into crank with the chain rings and the chain ring guard. Hit that up with a little penetrating spray. I'm using, there's obviously a lot of different brands. I'm using WD-40 Specialist Rust Released Penetrant Spray. Works pretty well. Put some on the back side of those bolts. And they're coming off pretty easily. One, two, chain ring guard, the larger chain ring, 5 bolts. Now this chain ring can come off as well, but we're going to have to first put it on the penetrating spray, maybe a little around there as well, and then put it in the vise. So I've run into my first problem. The crank with the smaller chain ring on it is causing some problems. I couldn't get that off with just the penetrating oil. So then I put some heat on it. That didn't seem to work either. So now I've got some more penetrating oil on it, and I'm gonna let it sit for a while. And then we'll see if we can get it off at that point. I do want to get it off because it would be very difficult to get the cranks, the rust off the cranks with that other chain ring on there. That's the main reason I want to do that. The larger chain ring is pretty rust free except for some pitting right here. But we'll be able to get this off with some steel wool and the wire wheel. The chain ring guard is pretty severe rusted, so I've put some evapor rust in this large container here, and we'll just let that soak for a few days. So now we'll see what we can do about cleaning this up. First with just some steel wool. I've got that dipped in some solvent. So I did a final little touch up on the wire wheel, and you can see that chain ring came out very nice. There's some parts where was severely pitted from the rust, but otherwise very nice. And considering this is the one that's going to be showing on the outside face of the bicycle, it will look pretty good. So next we're going to clean up these bolts, and then we're going to do one thing on the rear wheel because I think we're running out of time on this particular episode. To take the rear wheel apart, we first have to take the cassette of rear sprockets off. So start by taking the nut and the washer off. And again, because this is the drive side, it's a standard thread. And so the cassette is put on around a threaded ring. And because it's the drive side, you want it to tighten as it turns to the right. So it would be reverse to get it off, or lefty-loosey, if you will. The problem is on a multi-speed bike with a cassette like this, you can't get any leverage on it. If it was a single speed, we'd just be able to use a chain whip like one of these, because as the sprocket in the back, single sprocket in the back turns, it locks because it's a coaster, there's a coaster brake back there. But when you have this situation, how do you get it to turn? Well, it turns out there's a little splined piece in the bottom that actually holds the whole cassette on, and you use a tool like this to get it off. So it has a hex on one side that you'll put in a vise, and then these splines that match the spline inside. They come in different sizes, and I actually had to borrow this one, so that's why I'm going to be doing this today, because I have to bring it back tomorrow. So we're first going to get our tool here inside the vise, lock it down, and I already put a little bit of penetrating spray inside there, and I'm going to fit this down inside there. Now, again, the drive side is wanting to go that way, so you will loosen this that way but because I've got it flipped around, I'm actually going to turn the wheel this way. You have to do this while the whole wheel is together, just because of the leverage you're going to get. It would be very difficult to do this once the spokes are out and the axle housing is just standing alone. There it goes. I need a new vise. I kind of broke this one a while back. I didn't break it completely, but I broke it enough that it doesn't work very well. That's a story for another day on how that happened. Anyway. And there comes the cassette off. And this is just a spoke guard. And then we've just got the regular axle and whatnot. And this, you can see, is the threaded part on the end of the axle housing that the cassette of sprockets threads itself on. We'll get into that in the next video. So that's going to do it for this episode. Sorry that we were doing a lot of different parts, but that's just the way it's worked out. Hopefully next time we'll be able to get some further progress on that crank and that smaller sprocket, and then we'll definitely take apart the rear wheel completely and go through the cleaning process like we did with the front wheel. Thanks for sticking with me on this episode, and I hope to see you again next week on Featherstone Bicycles.